Welcome to The Launch, the podcast sponsored by Tandem Launch, Canada's premier incubator. We'll talk about tech, startups, entrepreneurship, fundraising, and everything in between. If you have a research background in tech and always wanted to build your own startup, then check out our website, tandemlaunch.com, to see what we're all about. Now on with the show. Welcome everyone to another episode of The Launch podcast sponsored by Tandem Launch. I'm your host, Bobbi Bidochka, and today joining me is Glenda Dorchak, Board of Directors Extraordinaire. So Glenda is a global technology industry veteran whose 30-year operating career has spanned general management, CEO, chairperson roles in the compute, semiconductor, and software sectors. So thank you so much for being here, Glenda.
Pleasure. I'm a big fan of Tandem Launch. It's real thrilled to be with everybody today.
Yay, love fans. Okay, so then let's start with the basics. So tell us a bit about yourself and your career.
Sure. Well, I've started my career at IBM, and I've been in the technology industry my entire working career. I became really fascinated. I was there when IBM was driving global tech, PC adoption, and just became fascinated with how technology was changing the way people lived and businesses operated. And from that point forward, I always was working on projects associated with new technologies coming into the marketplace. When I was at Intel, I was initially the COO of the communications business, so driving networks and Wi-Fi adoption, and then went on to be the group general manager driving broadband and consumer electronics groups. So we were doing all the original IoT work and distributed networks, and it's just been a great ride. And now I'm able to work with companies that are doing technologies for electronic vehicles, or for new user interfaces like Mirametrix. I used to be on the board of the Tandem Launch company, Mirametrix, that was acquired by Lattice. I've been on 18 boards over the course of 25 years, and 3 of those were where I was the CEO of the company. And I would say that CEO board experience really informed how I do my work today as an independent director. I love my work. I'm not retired. This is definitely a full-time job, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But the boards I'm on today are Wolfspeed, which is a company that does silicon carbide and gallium nitride solutions for electronic vehicles. ANSYS, which is the leading provider of simulation software for engineers around the world, and Global Foundries, which just went public in October last year and is one of the largest semiconductor manufacturers of the year, of the world. So it's been a great experience, and I love what I do. I still have a place in Vancouver, where I'm from, but I live in the Silicon Valley full time.
Nice. Wow. You have literally done it all. So, and 18 boards, that is phenomenal. So I cannot think of a better person to talk to us about the boardroom, which is what we're going to talk about today. This is a highly underrated and underestimated topic of discussion. So everybody listen up. Glenda has lots to share. So let's start with talking about, what does a board actually do? What do they spend their time on, and how do they make decisions?
Sure. The board's got 3 basic functions that define how we do our work. The first is governance. Every company's got some kind of articles of incorporation, and the board's duty is to make sure that they're executed from a legal and a financial standpoint. Advisory, which is what I think is one of the best parts of the job, which is helping, being a sounding board, helping CEOs and their staff think about the strategic direction they're going in, and what the ecosystem wants and what their markets want. And the last is leadership. Really, really important. The board's not there to run the company. The board's there to get a great CEO and make sure they're motivated and incentivized with a great comp package, and let them do their work. And that is, as I said, I think it's really, really important that boards keep to their main purpose, which is this governing and advisory and leadership role, and let the companies do their job.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about leadership. So what does that mean in a board setting?
Well, there are different roles inside the board and the way the board works, and every board I've been involved with, even ones that are angel invested companies, use work from a committee standpoint to help support the company. So typically you see an audit function or a compensation function, because people are so important. Everyone's competing for talent these days. And even at Mirametrix, in its very early days, we formed a compensation and people committee to help provide the tools for the CEO to get the best people he could get. So from a leadership standpoint, it's making sure that all of the tools are there that the company needs to, as I said, compensation systems, financial systems, and then also being really part of the structure of thinking through how the board meetings should work, getting the agendas done, often talking offline with other directors. Some people may think that board meetings are those 2 days, once a quarter that you get together. And I would say on every board I'm involved with, at least once a week, I'm doing something either with the company or with one of my fellow board members. It could be preparing for a committee meeting coming up, or talking about a challenge or a competitor. Ideally, if you get people on your board that know your industry and know your technology, you can make sure they can be an asset to you in terms of helping you be aware of issues that maybe you haven't seen before. So the time is spent outside of the boardroom on things that support the company. And the leadership occurs in the boardroom in terms of when there's a crisis and there needs to be, for example, financing. If the company is getting close to the end of its financial runway, I've seen boards mobilize in really focused manners to actually rise to the occasion, to bring in new money or to create debt or do the things to buy the company the runway it needs to do what it's destined to do. So leadership happens in a lot of ways. Last point I'll make is this one about how important it is to have a great CEO. Every board is comprised of people with different skills. I come in as a general manager, CEO, but there are people that come in as auditors or financial investors or legal backgrounds. I think it's really important to make sure that the board understands that their job is to do the governing and advisory, and let the CEO do their job. So to do that, you've got to get somebody that you're really confident in, and make sure their financial rewards are really aligned to their success and the company's success, and then everybody wins.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a shift there there's people have an idea of what a board is like, and I think maybe even sometimes people are a bit scared of their board and they don't want to talk to them about certain things, but we'll get to that topic a little bit later. So some of our audience may actually be interested in board work. So what advice would you have for someone looking to have their first board experience?
So what I always suggest to people when they're thinking about their own board career is to really look inward and understand where your abilities lie. I think there's a misunderstanding that it's sort of, if you've got general executive skills, that transfers well to the board. And it doesn't actually all the time. Boards don't spend a whole lot of time working on marketing activities. They don't spend a lot of time doing operational functions. They do tend to, and this is the strongest skill set, are people that come in with P&L experience, whether that comes from the financial path or from general management. The other thing I'm a huge advocate for is people that have a deep technology background. Every technology company, the CEO shouldn't be the only tech expert in the room. And so think about what your skills and expertise are, and what kinds of companies you want to be involved with. I personally always look really hard and fast at what the technology is that the company is developing, and what their market opportunity is, and weigh whether this is something that has a big opportunity or not. And if it does, then it's worth taking years and years, because often, especially on the private companies, we do that work for an equity position, and you're not doing it for your income. You're doing it to support the company's growth, and so you want something that's got a good long runway. So find your space where you will bring value. Then look at the group of companies that fit the model of what you're interested in. And I always really encourage people to then go online. Everybody's board of directors is on a website. See if you know anybody that's connected to these people, and actually don't wait for an executive recruiter to call. A vast majority of board seats come through networking, people that know each other, especially if it's in a smaller company. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a great opportunity for you to network and find opportunities that fit your requirements. One other thing, last thing I'd add, is there's also now a lot more expectation that boards will be diverse. And that's not just diverse in experience, but diverse in background and gender and everything. And I think that's opened up opportunities that just didn't exist for people 10 years ago. And so a lot of the universities have really good board preparedness programs that are great ways to get up to speed. The first time I ran a board meeting, I actually had to have the general counsel write out for me a script, so I knew how to call for something to be a motion to be passed, because I just didn't understand I didn't have the rhythm yet of how a board worked. So get a little education, look for your strengths, and then use your network to find that great little diamond in the rough company and really add value. I discourage people from trying to land their first billion-dollar public company board. It just, I got my experience doing things at smaller companies, building my skills, learning how to contribute at a committee level and at the board level. And then over time, you gain more experience, and you're able to take the bigger boards on. But it starts by really helping a company and a CEO and a board that's smaller quite often.
Mm-hmm. I'm big on being proactive. Like I always tell people, don't wait for a job post to apply on. Go to the company that aligns with their values and the things that you want to do, and seek them out. And people, I think, underestimate the efficacy of being proactive. And it certainly helps people on the other end. Oh, great, I don't have to go searching for board members. Someone came to me. This is amazing. And the chances of you being aligned, I think, are much higher in that way. So we hear a lot about corporate culture and company culture, but apparently there's something called board culture. So let's hear more about that.
Qualified today for what's going on. So the culture is a byproduct of all of us in the room. And the best boards support each other. Like there's high degrees of trust. There's a willingness to engage in conflict. If you avoid conflict, that leads to things like, somebody that should be removed from a board or removed from an operating role, or, avoiding something till the last minute when there's a financial issue that a company's got, they need money, but there's disagreement over dilution around how to recapitalize. And if you don't get that, if you aren't afraid to have those discussions, it means that you won't get the best outcome for the company. So the best directors are unafraid of conflict. They're committed and engaged, and they're accountable. And I think the accountability of boards has increased substantially over the last decade, because investors, especially institutional investors, are expecting way more of boards and the work they do than they did. And we could talk about, how things have changed in a bit. But board culture, share the oxygen. Last point is, I call it the art of the question. You're not asking questions to make yourself an expert on something. You're asking questions to help the management team think about a problem in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've got some experience where you know that there might be some blind spot that they've got, they haven't, maybe there's a competitive force they're not aware of, or some kind of law or financial constraint that they're going to have to deal with. If you can ask questions in an open-ended manner, you can expand the way the team is thinking and help them strengthen them, help them grow. So, when bad board culture is when someone asks a question to try and look smart, So you want to try and do it in a way that it helps people think differently about the issues that they're dealing with.
Yeah, I think that might be why some CEOs and founders kind of are afraid of the board. Like, oh, they're going to ask me questions, and if I don't have the perfect answer, I'm going to get in trouble, and they're going to think I'm terrible, and they're going to fire me, and I don't want to tell them all the bad stuff. So, like, what kind of advice would you give to C-suite individuals on how to deal with their board? And is there something they do that you just wish they wouldn't do that?
I will tell you that the board, as I said at the beginning, my CEO experience informed how I do my board work. And I look back on my early CEO board work, and I had a lot to learn. But one thing because that company had a crisis, there was no doubt that the board mobilized and helped me in a way that I didn't even know they could. So, I like to think of the board as sort of the 13th man on the team. They're not, there's a clear line in the sand. They're not running the company. They aren't doing your job as CEO. You're there to do the job, but they are an incredible wealth of resources, both experientially as well as financially. And so my pet peeve is the number of times that management teams will come in and you've got a 3-hour meeting, and they'll come in with a 200-page deck full of information, giving updates on sales conquests and PR and things like that. And then 15 minutes, is left in the meeting, and we get to the part where, we're sitting down with the CEO and he privately, and he says, we just lost such and such an order, and I've got a cash flow problem the month after next, kind of thing. In other words, spending a lot of time telling the happy stories about what the board is doing, and sort of, as you said, being uncomfortable talking about the difficult stuff. And the thing we expect is that we know you're doing good work all the time. You wouldn't be in the job if we didn't think you were doing good work all the time. You don't have to reinforce that. Yes, do an executive summary at the beginning of the good stuff, but don't waste all the time with your board talking about everything that's great and hiding the other stuff, because this is where the board can help. And so I would say a few things in terms of CEOs and their boards. One is set really clear expectations. Don't sign up for something because one enthusiastic director said, I think you should hit $100 million next year in revenue. That's what such and such a company did. If that's not the path you've got, if you've thought it through and you've got another path, the end game still has to be the same. You want your company to grow and be profitable and be successful, but you don't have to get it on the same path as everybody else. So really be prepared to stand up for your company and with the board, and don't hide the issues that you've got. Help them help you with the things that have to change. So be transparent.
So just so that to help everybody who might not fully understand the composition of a board, so you have your CEO and other C-suite individuals by their choice, or the founders, plus if you have institutional investors, depending on the agreements, they will have some seats. Independent board members like yourself, who have been brought on, who are not investors. That's the whole, hence the independent part, but with expertise and board member expertise and sector expertise. Are there other people who are invited or have a seat Like when I say seat, I mean there's people in the room and then there's, voting members.
Right. So in smaller boards, you can often have observers. So when I was at Intel, my team, we were making investments in technologies and small companies that we felt had influential long-term technologies. But we weren't there to be on their boards, but we always had a board observer seat negotiated into the financing. A smaller board, meaning a company that's round numbers, less than $50 million of revenue, is going to probably be relatively small. It'll be, say, 5 members, maybe with a couple of observers. If boards get too big when the company is small, it becomes, as I said earlier, you're doing consensus decision making. It becomes a lot more unwieldy. So I've always encouraged, it's better to have a smaller, more focused board. And by the time when you're a public company, you'll see that, boards as small as 7, but typical sort of small cap, large, medium cap boards will only be 9 people. And there's no observers in those situations. You've got 1 and sometimes 2 members of the company, so the CEO and sometimes a founder, sometimes like a CTO or sometimes a CFO. So maybe up to 2 insiders, and then the rest can be a combination of people who have been the investors and then the operators. And as you get closer to an IPO, by the way, I've come into a couple of companies where the company was within, a couple of years of going public or preparing to go public, and the investor directors start to peel off because they want the independence and of being able to manage their investment without the duty that a public company director has to have, and the restrictions, which includes trading stock. We're very restricted. We have to, there's processes by which you get approval for trading stock. So once you're a public company director, so smaller boards, will sometimes have 2 or 3 observers. But when I was the CEO of VirtualLogix, which was an Intel invested company, had this fantastic layer 1 virtualization technology that's in every cell phone that's in the world today. It's a really fascinating company. But we had 3 venture investors and 3 strategics, meaning Intel was 1, Cisco was 1, Motorola was 1. And so you get these blended boards of people that are executives working for large corporations that represent that. And these were board seats, not observer seats. But I also, in my tandem launch experience, we had, because a lot of the technology comes out of the university systems, we often, we had a UBC observer who, it was terrific to have someone from UBC on the board as an observer. So, it varies, but my one piece of advice is try and keep your board from getting too big. If at this stage you don't want to have to manage a large load of logistics with a board, even just calling together meetings when there's a large board in an emergency, and there's always an emergency, becomes really hard. So
yeah, exactly. Just booking the meeting in the first place. Great. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. So you alluded to it a little bit earlier, but the workplace has changed significantly over the last decade or so. So how is boards or board dynamics changed, and what are any current trends or things like that?
The environment today has changed, particularly in the last 10 years, dramatically. One is because institutional investors particularly, have become more active. And I consider that an incredibly good thing. I think every investor should be active, meaning they understand their companies, they monitor what's going on, and they have some expectations. So they obviously the priority has been over the last couple of years establishing standards for environmental, social, and governance (ESG). A tremendous push into diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, but also the whole clean tech, healthy planet initiatives around zero carbon emissions and carbon footprint and the things that companies are doing to make the world better or sustainable. And so there's a larger burden put into what are the goals the company has, getting the companies to publish the state of their ESG initiatives. Another thing is the work in terms of things like compensation. Some of these, if you get on a larger company, compensation is one of the most significant variable factors that the company and the board is responsible for administering. And there is much more oversight. And that's true. It started with Sarbanes-Oxley in terms of oversight of the financial side, and then Dodd-Frank for oversight of compensation matters. And those rules, by the way, while they were driven into the rules the SEC administers for public companies, the standards have spread to public and private companies. I think directors use the same duty of care and duty of loyalty and candor as they do often with public companies and those standards. So there are those sort of requirements. The other thing I was thinking about when you mentioned this to me when we prepared, I've thought about it since and thought, one of the things that's changed is when I was operating a company as a CEO, I started, I can't remember how many years ago, keeping my mobile phone next to the side of my bed, and I might mute it for a few hours, but I went to sleep and I was on again in the morning. The interesting thing is with the work I do on my boards, I still am doing that because our companies are global. Even smaller technology companies, and I know you have lots of fantastic Canadian businesses that Tandem Launch supports, but their customers are global. Mm-hmm. And so you can't get up at 7 o'clock in the morning and decide to look at your email at 10 because, something last night could have happened with a customer in China, and there needs to be a discussion about, the board needs to be called together because there is some kind of existential threat. So I think the work of the board has become we're much more present, we're much more engaged, and we have to be more agile. So, you might prepare for a board meeting in a certain fashion, but something happens the night before a board meeting and the CEO comes in and says, we're going to reduce the time we spent on this and that presentation because I want to have an hour to have a discussion with you about how we're handling, how I feel the organization needs to change over the coming year in terms of talent because we've just had a significant resignation. So those kinds of things where you're more present, more engaged, is definitely a sign of board work in later years. And it ties to the fact that we're in a world which is pervasive computing. I mean, our computers and our media is functioning 24 hours a day. Mm-hmm. And our businesses, the companies that we support their markets are 7x24 markets, and you have to support that. So I think there are trends holding boards to higher standards for how they govern. I also think there are behavioral operating changes, which is this constant support and focus. Or, I'm on my way after this meeting to meet with, have a coffee nearby with several directors of one of my company boards. And we're doing this because it's just good practice. There are a number of things that companies going through, interested to hear my fellow board members' perspectives on those things and on what's going on in any specific industry that's related to the company. So we're doing things to stay current and stay engaged with the company both in the boardroom and out. And I just think that standard has been raised significantly over the last few years, which is why I'm not retired. This is definitely a full-time job. And it's something I enjoy immensely.
Yeah, I think there's just so much more to it these days. I mean, I really, people care more about, especially the younger generations, about the climate and the environment and social causes and things like that. And the companies that fall behind on that, if you don't have sort of that embedded in your company, like people now align their values with their purchases. And I mean, if corporations used to have, well, they probably still do a little bit, but this reputation of being these non-caring, who cares, only profit-driven entities. And so, baking in regulations that, whether you believe it as a value, it's in the regulations now. You have to care about ESG. You have to care about these things. It's good for business. It's good for the planet. It's good for everybody. So that's really great. But look at what's going on, these days. You have a global pandemic. You have political things going on around the world that affect business. I mean, most businesses are multinational, not border driven. So yeah, it's really important that you keep your finger on the pulse, morning, noon, and night, because you never know what you're going to wake up to, right?
It's actually something we missed. Sorry for interrupting, but something we missed that probably is also everybody that's probably watching this podcast is going through some kind of issue with whether they're meeting in an office or not. Every single board is spending time with the management team to understand what the guidelines will be and how to support the workplace, because work apart and live remote is a reality now. It's yes. I mean, that March-April 2020 period, and I was on 6 boards at that time. I've had a couple acquired, but basically we were working all day and all night for every company, trying to figure out how to shut the companies down, the ones that weren't deemed to be essential businesses, and how to make sure our employees were safe. Now we're in a situation where the competition for talent and the ability, because of fantastic networks and great technology, if you're in a software company with fantastic developers, they can be doing that work in another city. How do you create a functional company that is able to achieve its potential and do it with the best people? But how do you adapt the workplace to that? And it's still dynamic. And I don't think we'll ever go back to exactly the environment we were in 2019. I don't think the whole corporate real estate model of having everybody that works for a company in a corporate desk is going to ever come back, because virtual work environments have proven to be effective. By the way, board works. I only have one board that meets in person, and we're all starting to come back now because everybody's vaccinated, and they go through tests before we enter the boardroom. But I think we've proven we can actually do our jobs through some kind of virtual video. Yeah. So it's the whole thing about the work environment is really one of the things that, I think so many boards and directors are spending time thinking about how to support the companies be able to adapt.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's influx, that is for sure. And I think there's some ESG upside to the pandemic here, because like you said, we can do some stuff remotely now. So I understand, Glenda, that you are open to some new board member or board advisory opportunities, specific, everyone, to the Pacific time zone, or the West Coast preferably. So anyone who's looking for a super awesome board member who knows her shit, then please reach out to Glenda Dorchak on LinkedIn. So thank you again, Glenda, for joining us. This was really mission critical information, and it was a real pleasure having you.
Well, I appreciate, Bobbi, the invitation. And again, I'm a big fan of everything you're doing at Tandem Launch, and love the chance to have a chat with the metaverse about what's going on in the boardroom. And by the way, people don't have to reach out to me about board seats. If you ever want to bounce a question off about how to deal with your board, you can reach me that way, and I can share my email from there. So
excellent.
Happy to help.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Glenda. And thank you very much to our loyal listeners. Your time is always appreciated. You can follow us on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So ciao for now. Thank you for listening. We hope you had fun and gained valuable insights. If you like what you see and hear, hit the subscribe button, leave us a comment, share the podcast, and follow us on social media.